The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Border and Maritime Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine the U.S. Border Patrol's Defense in-Depth strategy and its effect on local communities. I recognize myself now for an opening statement. First, I'd like to thank Chief Mark Morgan, who is testifying now before Congress for the first time as the new Chief of Border Patrol. Like your predecessors, I'm sure you will be spending frequent visits to our subcommittee as we discuss very important questions related to border security. Things like, what does a secure border look like? What are the right tools and strategies to achieve a secure border, and how do we measure success or failure? Today, I want to focus on the second question, an aspect of the current Border Patrol strategy known as Defense in Depth. Specifically, the unintended consequences the strategy imposes on border communities and residents that live along the border, including many of my constituents. In the early 1990s, the Border Patrol and U.S. Customs Service were outmatched in all aspects of illegal activity, both between and at the ports of entry. Yet, despite having a smaller Border Patrol at the time, agents apprehended millions of people. Border Patrol's response to this activity in El Paso and San Diego led to Operations Hold the Line and Gatekeeper that surged resources to the border in those major urban areas. In the short term, it stemmed the tide of illicit activity. However, it had the unintended effect of pushing the illicit activity away from urban areas and into the remote rural areas of the border. By design, the shifting cartel activity into more rugged terrain gave the Border Patrol the advantage of time to interdict people and target the contraband of smuggling. Border Patrol leadership routinely has articulated the strategy's effectiveness by explaining that in urban areas, they had a mere seconds to minutes to intercept the illegal activity. In suburban areas, minutes to hours. And in rural areas, they had anywhere from hours to days to interdict the illegal activity. Ceding territory for time has had profound ramifications, however, for populated rural areas along the border, like my district in Arizona. On a routine basis, our fellow residents are exposed to this illicit activity that crosses the border, trespasses on their land, destroys their property, and puts their lives at risk. Small businesses and tourism suffer from the illegal activity that is pushed deep into the interior of the country by a strategy that I believe now needs to be re-examined. To be clear, I'm not asking agents to link arms across the border 2,000 miles south, shoulder to shoulder. What I am asking for is we focus our resources and manpower more at the line of scrimmage, not 5, 10, 100 miles inland. Our enforcement posture should be arranged with the intent of anticipating, deterring, and stopping most illicit activity before it enters our communities, using the overwhelming majority of agents and technology as close to the line as terrain access and agent safety will allow. I've spent countless hours at the border with ranchers, border residents, and the Border Patrol. In many instances, I've observed miles-long stretches of the border with little to no agent activity actually patrolling the road near the fence. I've also witnessed whole sections of fence cut out, allowing an untold number of vehicles to come across the border before being detected. Presence on the border matters, serving as both a deterrent to legal activity and as a rapid response to inevitable breaches. I'm mindful that geography has an effect on where we apprehend individuals and interdict narcotics, but we cannot cede 10 to 100 miles or more of U.S. territory waiting for these nefarious actors to be caught at the time and place of our choosing. Instead, we have to take the fight to them at the earliest point of the incursion. In Tucson, 48% of the total number of apprehensions took place more than 5 miles from the physical border. Compare that with Yuma or Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where more than 84% of illicit crossings are apprehended in the first 5 miles. But let's be clear, for citizens who live along the border, 5 miles is like an eternity. Interior checkpoints are part of the layered approach to border security that have created challenges for the men and women that I was sent here to represent. The Border Patrol uses a mix of permanent and tactical checkpoints along major routes in and out of the border. Consistent with its defense in depth strategy, checkpoints are designed to push the illicit traffic around the checkpoints into areas where the Border Patrol has a better chance of interdiction. But when checkpoints have really done is to introduce the inconvenience, hassle, and the threat as a way of life for law-abiding American citizens who live near these checkpoints. The Border Patrol has little to show for their use. Very few apprehensions take place at an interior checkpoint, and to add insult to injury, the checkpoints are closed when it rains to prevent a traffic accident. All the cartels have to do is wait for the weather to change to bypass this layer of defense. In 2014, the University of Arizona's National Center for Border Security and Immigration conducted an in-depth study concerning the effectiveness of checkpoints and the impact on local communities. The report makes a series of recommendations to develop measures of effectiveness and to closely track the impacts of checkpoints on communities. To date, I don't think the Border Patrol has followed or implemented the recommendations, but I look forward to talking about that today. And we do have a University of Arizona representative on the second panel. Defense in depth and a layered approach to border security sounds good in theory, but there are real-world negative impacts for the American citizens who live at or near the border. I look forward to hearing from the Chief and the witnesses on the second panel to discuss looking at a better approach. The Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, gentleman from Texas, Mr. Vela, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Congresswoman McSally. I don't have a whole lot more to add. I want to welcome you, Chief Morgan, to this hearing today and congratulate you on your appointment. My perspective on your agency and these checkpoints comes from having crossed the Sarita and Falfurrias checkpoint virtually all of my life. When I was a young lawyer, I traveled between Brownsville and Corpus Christi almost weekly, and I used to get really frustrated having to go through the checkpoint because to me it didn't make sense that I, as an American citizen, born in Brownsville, would have to be asked whether or not I was a citizen 2 hours north. However, my father was a federal judge with jurisdiction over the Sarita checkpoint, and when I would often voice my frustration, he would remind me of the volume of apprehensions that he would witness. So over time, I kind of softened my reaction. But your agency is very much a part of life across the entire U.S.-Mexico border, and definitely for those of us in South Texas. Over the course of the last year, I can tell you, I talk to your agents on an official basis sometimes, but more often on an unofficial basis because they live all around us. They're part of our social fabric. And I can tell you that you have some challenges ahead because over the course of the last year, there is hardly an agent that I have run into, many who have been part of the agency for many, many years, who have expressed a level of dissatisfaction and just feeling a lot of low morale with many of the people that work for the agency. So I look forward to working with you as we move forward and with the rest of the committee and to see what we can do about improving morale for the agents on the ground and doing what we can to make your agency as effective as possible. But I yield the balance of my time.
Thanks. The gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to be joined today by two panels of distinguished witnesses to discuss the important topic today. The sole witness of our first panel is Mr. Mark Morgan. Mr. Morgan is the Chief of the United States Border Patrol, a position he assumed earlier this year. Before entering the U.S. Border Patrol, Mr. Morgan served in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Los Angeles Police Department, and the U.S. Marines. While at the FBI, Chief Morgan served as the special agent in charge of El Paso Division and as a deputy assistant director for the Inspection Division. Chief Morgan's full written statement will appear in the record. The Chair now recognizes the Chief for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member Vela, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this important hearing today. This is a proud moment for me. This is the first appearance at a congressional hearing representing the dedicated and talented men and women of the United States Border Patrol. During my first 2 months here as chief, I've had the privilege to meet thousands of agents, staff, and trainees along the northern, southern, coastal borders, the United States Border Patrol Academy, and a headquarters here in Washington. I can't think of a better way for me to have started my tenure than to get out in the field, to listen, learn, and observe. It's exceeded my expectations. In all these interactions, two critical facts have been crystal clear to me. One, I still have a heck of a lot to learn. And two, the men and women of the United States Border Patrol have one of the toughest jobs in the federal law enforcement. The complex challenges we face in 21st century law enforcement are more difficult than I've seen in my 30 years of my career. The threat environment is constantly evolving, and this demands that we do the same. This was never more evident than my assignment as the FBI Special in charge of the El Paso Division in Texas. The unique environment facing law enforcement and the intelligence community along the southwest border are unparalleled. It was there that I first learned about the vast and challenging Border Patrol mission and just how critical it is to our nation's security. I was astonished at the magnitude of the Border Patrol mission, and I was equally impressed with the men and women serving honorably every day to carry out that complex, constantly evolving, and never-ending mission. I can tell you from my personal experience, they are hardworking, dedicated to this mission and their country, and have and continue to make personal sacrifices to protect the citizens of this great nation. So I sit before you today, honored and privileged to be part of the United States Border Patrol team. You know, the numbers we often hear associated with the United States Border Patrol are the numbers of annual apprehensions of those attempting to illegally enter the country every year. It's hundreds of thousands. I'd like to take a few minutes to also share some other numbers that we don't often talk about. I've learned that the United States Border Patrol agents are among the most assaulted law enforcement personnel in the country. There have been 7,542 assaults against agents since 2006, and 30 agents have died in the line of duty since 2003. The recent passing of Border Patrol agent Manuel Alvarez serves as a vivid reminder of the dangerous, challenging, and unique environment Border Patrol agents are asked to experience. Another number which often gets little mention is how often the Border Patrol agents put themselves in harm's way to provide emergency medical care and assistance to those in need, to include those that are trying to illegally enter the United States. Every year, the United States Border Patrol is involved in the rescue of thousands of victims of human smuggling and individuals attempting to illegally cross the United States. More than 3,700 this fiscal year alone. In July, the Laredo Sector Border Patrol agent risked his own life as he jumped into the Rio Grande to save 4 victims that were surely to drown. Also, this past July, the Tucson Sector Border Patrol agents risked their own lives to rescue 15 individuals that were attempting to illegally enter the United States, and they found themselves trapped in an open pit mine in Green Valley, Arizona. And just a few weeks ago, the Buffalo Sector Border Patrol Marine units made landfall on the Canadian shore in the middle of the night after observing a house was on fire. They made landfall and they alerted the resident's family and escorted them to safety as the home became engulfed in flames. Today's hearing is to discuss Border Patrol agents and the Border Patrol's strategic use of checkpoints. I think that it does acknowledge that illegal and dangerous cross-border activity can occur away from the immediate border. The Border Patrol's posture includes a threat-based, intelligence-driven, multifaceted approach, such as checkpoints and forward and operating bases that are strategically located on known routes from the border in an effort to maximize our resources and prevent a single point of failure. For example, just a few weeks ago, a driver attempted to flee the Cerrito checkpoint in the Rio Grande Valley when Border Patrol agent K-9 had alerted to his vehicle. The driver was apprehended and 7 people, illegal immigrants, were discovered locked in the vehicle trunk with no means of escape. Along with sophisticated technology, enhanced infrastructure, the dedicated and skilled law enforcement personnel and partnerships, the use of checkpoint operations are a current component of the Border Patrol's later strategy to protect this country's national security and ensure the safety of the public we are here to serve. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions and having dialogue concerning where, as an agency, we can get better at what we do.
Thanks, Chief Morgan. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. So, as a relatively new chief of the Border Patrol, and one that wasn't an agent first, you mentioned in your opening statement that you've taken time and toured the different sectors and just taking a fresh look as to the mission that they have, the challenges that they have. So based on that and the topic of this hearing, which checkpoints is one element of it, but really we're looking at the full defense in-depth strategy. Can you share what did you learn about the defense in-depth strategy, and do you agree that this should continue to be the approach that we take, especially in rural communities?
Yes, ma'am. So I think I first learned that I'm probably going to stop referring to it as depth and defense strategy. I think that there's been a perception that means we're actually intentionally ceding ground and territory. I don't think that's what I'm seeing. I think what I'm seeing, and I, after 2 months, you're right, I still have a lot to learn. I'm still taking a hard look at this, and I'm asking a lot of questions. I think what I'm observing is the strategy really is, as I said in my statement, is trying to come up with a comprehensive, multifaceted layer strategy that prevents us from having a single point of failure. That really is my concern. Now, there's lots of different ways that maybe that can be achieved, and we need to take a look at that and continue to grow. I think the Border Patrol is going in the right direction, being that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused organization that's supported with infrastructure, technology, and personnel. But also that I think part of that strategy, we know that regardless of as we continue to grow on that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused approach supported by infrastructure, technology, and people, things are still getting across. That's what I saw too, and that's what I'm learning. We're getting better. We're not where we need to be yet, but we are getting better. But things are getting across. And so as I'm looking at that, what do we do to prevent the things that do get crossed and do get by us? How do we have a strategy that gives us a second look at that, gives us a second chance at that to eliminate that single point of failure? I think that's what I'm seeing with respect to the strategy.
So thanks, Chief. During your time and your discussion and your visits, I mean, were you able to see, or do you agree that, again, if you see the vast majority, in the Tucson sector anyway, of apprehensions are taking place north of 5 miles from the border, that the illicit activity does have some serious repercussions to border communities and residents?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely agreed. I've been to Del Rio. I've been to RGV. I've sat with the ranchers. One night I had dinner with the local ranchers there. It was a great barbecue. I sat and I talked with them. And the elements that you mentioned in your opening comments are exactly what they're saying as well. And I think they're absolutely, unequivocally legitimate in everything that they say. If I was a rancher and I hear that they talk about the things that they do from what others may seem as small, a gate left open, it's not small to a rancher. Cattle can get out, right? They can have devastating impacts. They have seen people that have passed on their property. Their property is getting broken into. Things are being stolen. Yes, ma'am. So it's absolutely a serious issue. And I can say, my tour and being out in the field, especially on the southwest border, I have not met a Border Patrol agent yet that doesn't understand that and take that equally as serious.
Great, thanks. As part of your assessment, do you think we have enough agents to secure the border? My understanding is we're now below 20,000 agents nationwide. And then I guess the other question, again, related to the strategy is, of the agents that you have, are you taking a look at where they are assigned? We hear a lot from the agents themselves about those that are being detailed away and not enough are mustering actually to be out patrolling on a daily basis. Those percentages, as we've done some, just different visits and talking to people, seem to be a little bit lopsided as far as those that are out in the field versus those that are in other assignments. So are you taking a look at that, and what have you learned from the number of agents and where they're actually assigned?
Yes, ma'am. And so I think all elements you just said, absolutely unequivocally, I'm taking a look at that across the board. There's a couple of things. So first, to answer your question, do we have enough? My first immediate answer is, I don't know yet when it comes to the personnel, because I think we have to do also what you said is take a look at the resource allocation and where are they at. I think also it's a layered approach. I think to answer that question honestly, it's a little premature, I think, for me to be able to do that and have that confidence before I give you those numbers. Because again, part of that is increasing our ability to identify and understand the threat and have the situation awareness to be able to continue to grow, being intelligence-driven, and then focusing our operations towards that threat. It's also a combination of infrastructure and technology. Through the use of infrastructure and technology, it could impact the need for a number of agents. So I'm taking a look at that. I think you hit the other element right on the head, is that basically, are the agents where they need to be? I don't know. I don't know. I'm taking a look at that. I'm asking those questions. If you look at the history, as you mentioned as well, hold the line, gatekeeper. If you look at the history of the Border Patrol, resources had to be shifted as the threat shifted. I think that's hard for an organization that is static in nature, meaning people have to move and buy homes and et cetera, but also being agile and mobile enough to be constant, having that constant ability to be able to go where the evolving threat is. We're taking a look at that. We have mobile response teams. And so, some sectors may see some agents leave. I don't know, you may see agents leave the Tucson sector, for example, but they may be going to RGV, which they're just getting hammered right now with the influx of folks crossing. And so we have to take a look at that, I think, in a holistic approach. But yeah, absolutely, we're taking a hard look at that.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna one more quick question on the checkpoints, and then we'll get another round because I want to go deeper into it. So we've got these permanent checkpoints on most roads in Arizona, and I know they're across the rest of the border. I mean, look, if you are a hardened cartel operative and you drive through a known Border Patrol checkpoint, you should get the Darwin Award. Okay, so I mean, as I've talked to agents and I've talked to your predecessor, you're picking up the low-level criminals who maybe don't know any better, don't have good intel themselves, think somehow they're going to be getting through, but not the serious cartels. The understanding, the way it's been described, is you intend that the serious cartels, the transnational criminal organizations, are going to go around the checkpoints. And that pushes them into our communities. We'll hear from the second panel about some of the impacts of that, so we won't be able to have that sort of dialogue. So I want to make sure we get this discussion out in this first panel. So, and then we talk to agents who say they don't have enough manning to actually go out and patrol the walkaround. So this is impacting, if they're agents are at the checkpoints, but they're not out there fanning out for those that are going around it, then you're still not intercepting them, yet they're being a public safety threat to the communities that are around the checkpoint. So can you just talk a little bit about that checkpoint strategy, the fact that they're fixed versus roaming, they close down when the rain comes, so, the bad guys just line up during monsoon season, they know exactly when to go around them, and just like what your assessment is of how we can improve or take a fresh look at the use of these checkpoints.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, I want to say absolutely we should take a look at this at 100%, and I am, and we are absolutely looking for every opportunity we can improve. I think that's how great organizations get better. I think the Border Patrol is a great organization, but I think the way we get better is to continue to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves, is what we're doing working? Is it effective? And can we get better? So absolutely, I'll be asking those questions. Now, more specific, I'll have to do a little bit more work to be able to provide you a solid answer whether specific cartels are using the checkpoints. I can tell you from my experiences, 20 years in the FBI, and as well as what I've seen thus far in the Border Patrol, is that serious drug cartels do use lower-level mules to do transportation. I think last year alone, the checkpoints, I think it was around 75,000 tons of drugs seized this year. We're about on track to do that via the checkpoints. So they are getting serious amounts of drugs. Now they change their TTPs. Sometimes the loads are smaller, but that doesn't mean necessarily it's not coming from a serious drug trafficking organization. They're just changing their TTPs. The other part, with respect to pushing around the community, I think I'm seeing there's some truth to that. What I'm seeing that Border Patrol's part of the strategy is they do have roving patrols around those checkpoints for that, and they base that on the intelligence and the traffic flow. They also can set up intermediate or temporary checkpoints as well to try to stop the flow of people going around. So I think they do have a strategy that's trying to address that. Holistically, how effective is that? I still need to get some more data on that to be able to provide you a good answer. Okay,
I'll come back during round two, but I will tell you that at some checkpoints in Arizona, they don't have the manning to do the roving patrols. So these are all hand in hand. Where is the Border Patrol manning going, and do you have the manning to be able to address those issues? And then the impact, again, on the private property and the local communities when the bad guys are going around. So I'm going to go ahead and yield to my ranking member here, Mr. Vela, for his opening questions.
So are you making a distinction between the effectiveness of the checkpoints in terms of catching people versus catching loads of narcotics?
I'm not sure, sir, what you mean by making a difference.
Well, I guess what I'm curious about is, I mean, we see statistics when we cross these checkpoints in terms of, pounds of cocaine that have been, that has been detected, and so much marijuana. And I'm just trying to get an assessment as to whether what your sense of how effective the checkpoints are with respect to apprehension of narcotics versus apprehension of people.
I think at this point, I'm seeing the checkpoints that are an effective part right now of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. I am seeing that. I'm not saying that there's not alternatives that we should look at or we could look at, again, as part of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. But currently, as a structure right now, the statistics are showing that they are effective at the immigration enforcement of which their primary purpose is. Last year, the checkpoints across southwest border, I think, was about 8,000. This year, I think we're on track for that same number as well. So on its face, they appear to be effective as that part of the strategy to prevent us from having a single point of failure. Now, ancillary, in addition to that, yes, they're being, I would categorize it as very successful with respect to drug seizures. I think they're also being somewhat successful in catching people, criminals that have outstanding warrants, state, federal, local warrants for some pretty violent, heinous crimes, as well as those that have been convicted of violent crimes in the past. That's also happening at the checkpoints as well.
Yeah, and I didn't mean the question to be critical. I was just trying to get your assessment of the effectiveness of the checkpoints with respect to those different tasks that the agency has at the checkpoints.
Yes, sir. And so I think right now, I would say they appear to be effective, especially with the resources that are actually dedicated to the checkpoints. It's actually a very small amount of the Border Patrol resources that are dedicated to checkpoints overall. And I would say that the statistics that are being produced by those checkpoints, I would say at this point, knowing what I know now, I would categorize them as being successful.
So back on the issue of morale, just to give you an idea of how entrenched the Border Patrol has been in South Texas and in my life there, your agency served as pallbearers at my father's funeral. So when I talked to agents, it happened last weekend at a golf tournament, and I, by coincidence, ran into two agents, came up to me, and they had the same story, and it was, how deeply things had changed from their perspective in the Border Patrol, and not for the good, right, from a morale standpoint. And what I found, and this is not just a statement on the Border Patrol or Department of Homeland Security, but with respect to federal agencies in general, and the disconnect between the offices up here in Washington, D.C. and what's going on the ground. And I guess I know you just started, and I know that these assessments that you have made are your initial assessments, but what can you tell us about where you're headed with respect to improving morale? And for that matter, these conclusions that I've come to aren't based on statistics that I've read in these notebooks that were handed or what staff has told me. These are real-life conversations that I have, with the people that work for you, right? And so I'm just kind of curious, are you getting the same sense I am, or is it different?
Yes, sir. Well, first, I would absolutely love to maybe do an offline and get more in depth of what you're actually hearing from the line agents, because I think as the Chief of the Border Patrol, that's exactly what I need to hear. If I'm going to take a look at issues and be able to really make the impact that I need, I go out there in my stump speech, part of what I tell them is, part of one of my key roles as the chief is to be their relentless advocate. And I think part of being the relentless advocate is understanding what they're feeling. each and every day. That's really one of the main reasons why on day 3 I decided that I was going to go out to the field and I'm going to visit every single sector, all 20 sectors, and I'm not going to stop until I complete it. And since I've been out there, I've stood in front of musters of 300, and I've talked to 2 mechanics in the garage, and I've listened to them. And so I am hearing issues about morale. Morale is not where it needs to be, but there's a lot of reasons for that, and it's very complicated. I can say, so the FEV survey, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey that went out, is that it really kind of told us and identified that there are some morale issues and there's some challenges, but it's only one point of context. And so what the Border Patrol did is they actually commissioned an outside entity to come in and take a look at the basic information from the FEV survey, and they went out. They went out to 13 sectors, talked to over 900 personnel from the Border Patrol chief sector of the sector all the way down to the mechanic. And from that, they came up with these basic 8 core areas, and then we brought back additional people to do a deeper dive to really get to the core root of the issues. And then the plan is, for my plan, is to really do some targeted teams on those issues to really try to address those issues to improve morale. Those are specific things, but I think there's also some bigger things that we need to take a look at too. I think we've mentioned some of those as well. And that's the second thing that I tell them as part of my job that I think will impact morale, is as a chief to get them the resources, the training, the tools, and the technology to do their job effectively and safely. And I think this goes to the heart of the hearing, as a matter of fact, is our strategy right? Are the things that we're using correct? We need to take a look at that. We do, everything. Sitting as a new chief, I can tell you, I'm not accepting anything that I see as it's the right thing. I'm not doing that. I am asking questions, and I am asking for explanations. Why are we doing this? Is this the right thing? Are there alternatives to prevent us from having a single point of failure? Or is checkpoints the only thing that we can do? I think that's important going forward.
Well, look, I look forward to working with you on that issue and many others. And what I can tell you is that I'm sure the surveys are real nice and everything, but between Mr. Hurd and Congresswoman McSally and Mr. Higgins, who represents the northern border, and those of us who interact with your agencies every day, not to mention the people that we have working for us back in our offices. I was at my office back in the district 2 weeks ago, and agents were coming in. So our offices have a significant degree of interaction with the people that work for your agency. And, use us as a tool, because I think that we can help bridge some of these gaps, given our interaction with your agency with your agents on the ground day to day. But thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. I would absolutely like to take advantage of that. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thanks for this this hearing as well. Chief, thanks for being here. Congratulations. I enjoyed working with your predecessor, Chief Fisher, and when I was a little more engaged with Oversight and Management Efficiency Subcommittee. I've been on this committee for 6 years, and this topic never seems to go away. You've got quite a challenge ahead of you because of the bureaucracy that you work for. I'm glad you're asking the questions. I hope we can make those changes as you seek answers, and I look forward to working with you. I think you'll find a willing Congress, at least a willing committee to help you. It's not just the border states and their delegations that are interested. Immigration issues affect everyone. Drug issues affect everyone. National security issues affect everyone, even in South Carolina. So coming on the heels of 9/11, 15 years later, a lot of reflection over what happened, mistakes made, and all that. I've done a lot of radio interviews, and I've told folks that I don't know that we're any safer today by combining all these agencies under DHS and our border's still unsecure. I say that in that we still have illegals and contraband and drugs and illicit activity happening that's coming across our border. That's no fault of yours, and that's no fault of your personnel. I applaud you and I support you, and I want to keep working with you. But the facts are the facts, that we have illegals coming into this country, and we have another element coming into this country illegally, walking across our border, and that's a DHS term of OTMs, other than Mexicans. These are personnel that aren't just the Hispanic origin folks that are coming to take the jobs in agriculture, horticulture, hospitality, you name it. These are people who we really don't know their intent because the apprehension rates of folks that have crossed our border are speculative. I say that in that Jay Johnson has said, well, we take the number that we catch and then we kind of extrapolate that and figure out how many we're not catching. And that's alarming when you really think about that. So do you know the percentages of OTMs that are apprehended on the border? These are people from Africa, the Middle East, Asia. What's that percentage, based on your knowledge?
Sir, I don't know that exact percentage of OTMs.
Okay, it's no problem.
I can
America just needs to know
Yes, sir.
that there are people crossing our border that aren't just from Latin descent in Mexico or Guatemala or whatnot, coming to take jobs, coming to bring their unaccompanied children here or whatnot, that there are folks that have traveled great distances, oftentimes using false or fake passports and a lot of money, traveling through the tri-border region of South America, transiting up through Latin America, and coming into this country. Some may have goals of providing for their family. I don't discount that. But I believe some may have nefarious goals. And on the heels of 9/11, I'm going to be very, very cognizant of that. So Congress in 2006 passed the Secure Fence Act. I wasn't here. I applauded it as a state legislator in South Carolina, but then Congress failed to appropriate the dollars to complete the job. I don't know how many miles have been completed now. I believe in more fencing. I believe it works because I believe there are areas, I know there are areas you can't fence. Nogales sector, the mountains are high. But what it does is it puts the bad element, I guess, into corridors that makes your personnel more effective. So I see it as a force multiplier. But we all know that a taller fence just means a higher ladder, or a higher fence means a taller ladder, and elements are going to cross over that fence. That's where electronic surveillance, that's where other force multipliers actually come in. I appreciate that. But if you go and look on, and you go to my Facebook page, Jeff Duncan put it up there last week, 2 weeks ago. There's a video in San Diego. San Diego News, which isn't the most conservative news source, but they were talking about the fact that people are coming into this country, they're apprehended by you guys and let go because they're claiming asylum. And it also says that this isn't a policy that is bottom up. This is from the very top guy sitting down here on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue saying, let them go. I will tell you in South Carolina, we're not very happy about that. About folks that have crossed our border, broken our laws, violated American sovereignty. We are a sovereign nation, and they're let go. So, and I'll blame you for that. These are problems we've got to work on together. I'm acknowledging that. I'm offering help to work on it together as Congress. And we've been told in 6 years I've been here by folks that work within DHS that we have operational control of the border. I can't get a good definition of what that operational control means, Madam Chairman, but I would ask the Chief, in your opinion, what does operational control mean, and have we achieved operational control of our southern border? The northern border is for another topic, another day. The southern border is where I'm focused.
Yes, sir. So I'll start with the latter, operational control. 2 months in, I am taking a look. I'm not sure, again, I caveat that with 2 months in, I'm not sure operational control is the right way to look at this. And I am questioning that term to be able to provide everyone that should with that definition. I think I go back to the strategy of being threat-based, intelligence-driven, operation-focused, supported by infrastructure, technology, and personnel. With that as the framework, I think the goal is that we're striving to have confidence levels through our situational awareness. So I'm asking folks, what are your confidence levels from zone to zone within a station, within a sector, throughout the entire 6,000 plus land border miles and 2,000 coastal we're responsible for? I pulled a little bit out from my FBI experience as we went through in the aftermath of 9/11, we're trying to figure out and ask ourselves the same question. And so I want to be able to get to a sector chief, to him or her, and say, what are your confidence levels with respect to the situational awareness that you have in your sector. Tell me about that. Talk to me about that. How did you get that? Talk to me about your threats. Talk to me about the intelligence process. Talk to me about your partnerships. Talk to me about the use of infrastructure, technology, and personnel that you use to get to that. And we need to have a defined set of metrics and factors that we all go in, that goes into a sector chief being able to determine their confidence level. And then based on that, that's how we allocate those resources. I think that's the direction that we need to go, but I'm asking those questions. So again, I would say I'm not sure operational control. And one of the reasons why I'm not sure operational control is the right frame is because the TTPs change too quickly. Again, it was as mentioned, ma'am, your opening comments about gatekeeper and hold the line. Those are great examples of how we did all this and the stuff shifted. So at one moment we could say we had operational control in the area, and the next minute it'll change. But if we have that process that I described, having situational awareness, I think that's going to position us better to be able to do what we need to do. I would like to talk a little bit and respond to what you mentioned about people are coming here and they are being allowed to then come into the United States. I think that's also something that we need to talk about and take a look at, because when we talk about resources, specifically manpower, what I see that we're being asked to do, and please don't get me wrong, we're going to do whatever we're going to be asked to do. The political decisions or the policies of the United States government, that's not our role to get involved in. Whatever you decide, we're going to do. What we're being asked to do right now, I think you could phrase it a little bit as a humanitarian mission. For example, some of what you referred to, sir, is the unaccompanied children that are coming across. I stood in the Rio Grande Valley on one of the cut roads where a smuggler had told some children, once they made landfall, to go on the cut road until you came in contact with a United States Border Patrol agent. And I was there and I watched that. And I watched a little 6-year-old girl holding the hands of her 11-year-old brother. And they made the trek all the way from Honduras. Now, personally, I wanted to take that little girl home with me. I did. And that's something that will probably stick with me my entire life. But as a chief of the United States Border Patrol, which I think we have a national security interest in this country, we have a law enforcement threat in this country, I think when I look at that 6-year-old, she's not a national security threat or a law enforcement threat with respect to what I see my job as a chief of the Border Patrol. But I'm taking a lot of resources dedicated to what I would say is a humanitarian role, and I'm taking them off the line. And so I think there needs to be discussion, and I'm asking questions, what are some alternatives we could do instead of taking agents that have been trained, that have a national security mission, should be on the front line. I'm taking them off that front line a lot to process a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old as part of the humanitarian mission. So I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, let me just finish up by saying I appreciate your position on the children. That pulls at our heartstrings, and it is the right thing for America to do to try to figure out this. But the issue is exacerbated, Madam Chairman, by all the other things we've talked about. When you think 49% of all illegals in this country didn't come across that southern border or northern border, they came with a permission slip. America gave them permission to come to this country. We trusted them. And they have violated that trust by overstaying that visa and remaining in this country. That's low-hanging fruit for enforcement. That's a different division, I get that. But going back to the point, that exacerbates the problem of being able to deal with her. So visa overstays, border enforcement, dealing with the criminal element within this country, then dealing with the other illegals that happen to be in this country and what we do if they're gainfully employed and that sort of thing, and the children you're talking about, whether it's the unaccompanied children that are coming across or whether it's the children of people that have come here known as dreamers. But you have got to take it in priority, I think, because it all gets so convoluted as a total immigration reform package that we're not able to have an adult civil conversation about her, right? So you mentioned structure, technology, and personnel. I'm with you. But if they evade that fence, you pick them up with a ground sensor and a camera or a drone, you send the personnel to pick them up, and they're let go 2 hours later, we're wasting a heck of a lot of money with structure, technology, and personnel, okay? We've got to stop letting them go. And with that, Madam Chairman, great committee hearing. I would love to bring him back when he's not just here for 2 months, when he's got a little bit, a sense of the agency, and have an in-depth conversation about, and this may be for the next Congress, but we ought to have an operational control hearing to delve more into what that looks like. So thank you so much. I yield back.
Absolutely. And on that note, we had a hearing with the acting chief, where we were trying to address the issues of situational awareness and operational control. Part of the challenges that we've had is how do we measure effectiveness? And those numbers have shifted over the years. When we went from 2010 to measuring operational control to measuring number of apprehensions as some measure of whether you're being successful, which I've never understood. Let me just be clear. I mean, if number of apprehensions go up when you don't know what the denominator is, then is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And so we addressed this issue in a hearing a couple of months ago. I know these are complicated issues, but I do want to follow up on the operational control discussion. From my perspective, again, it's formed and shaped by my experiences in the military. There are two major measurements that I would be looking for as a subcommittee chair here. The first is, what percentage of the southern border do you have situational awareness of real time, not change detection after the fact, but real time. So if something is coming up to the international boundary and is attempting to go over the border, we actually see it real time, whether that's with a person or with a camera or with an airborne asset, manned or unmanned, whatever it is. What percentage do we have situational awareness of? Now, you may not be able to get to it right away. That's the second issue. But what do we actually, if it moves, we see it. And again, these are complicated issues, but coming from a simple fighter pilot point of view of what's your situational awareness? And then the second question being, of those that you see, what can you intercept? That's operational control. So you first is, if it moves, you see it. Second is, if you see it, you can get it, right? So then you have a sense of the denominator because like we saw it, but we didn't get it, so it got away. So that's part of the, the success rate impact. And when we've pressed on this issue and some of the challenges we have with our constituents, quite frankly, in this national dialogue is because the measurements have been sort of shifting and number of apprehensions is meaningless to most people, they don't have a sense of what level of confidence do we have? What percentage of the southern border, which we're focusing on, actually do we have situational awareness and operational control? And the answer we got out of the previous acting chief was a little bit over 50%, 56% I think was the number, of real-time situational awareness. If it moves, you see it. You know something's coming. Now that needs to improve, obviously. We've got to get ourselves in parallel to a place that you can see it, and then you can actually do something about it, right? To be able to intercept it with the right assets that you need with the appropriate vehicles, whether that's foot patrol, horse patrol vehicles, ATVs, helicopters, whatever it takes, to be able to actually intercept that. Ideally on the south side of our constituents' ranch is not on the north side or 100 miles inland. And I think that's some of the challenges that bring us to kind of where we are here today. Obviously, if we were able to see what moves and intercept what moves as close to the border as possible, from my perspective, spending time with the Border Patrol agents, spending time with the residents and ranchers, if we were able to do that, not only would you be able to do the mission closer to the border as possible, which will impact all the discussions we'll have on the second panel, but also it impacts the humanitarian element, quite frankly. You're not having to go deal with someone out in the desert 80 miles north who's on the verge of dehydration and death, right? Because you are intercepting them right at the border. So all the things that are being referenced, and then less would be needing to be picked up at the checkpoints, in theory, right? I mean, we've got a number of narcotics coming through the checkpoints, but if we were able to push the line of scrimmage to the border, then less would be actually making it around the border and into the communities and then going into the checkpoints. Does that make sense? So, I mean, the part of our discussion is what can we do and what resources do you need to have intelligence-driven operations like you've talked about, threat-based, nimble, on your feet. As soon as we are effective, they're going to shift their tactics. They're innovative, they're entrepreneurs, these cartels. So what can we do to make sure you have the resources, the policy, the manpower, which is a win-win for everybody. This is a win-win for the agency, the country, the agents, the ranchers, the residents, I mean, all the way around. One of my frustrations often is that I feel like sometimes people are pit against each other in this discussion. Like, what the border residents and ranchers are looking for is not what the agents or the agencies looking for. We're all in this together. I mean, we can find where our common interests are to protect our country and to keep our community safe, right? And give the tools to the agents that they need that do that, and then that impacts the communities and the residents all the way around. I mean, this is the fundamental conversation that we've been having, since I've been in Congress and the time that I was running, and now, now that I've been in this position and the subcommittee chair. So, based on all that and wanting to get in this place, which I think we have a common interest on trying to get to this place where we keep the community safer, we see more, we catch more, we give the tools to the agents that they need, and push that line of scrimmage closer to the border. The question is, what else do you need in order to do that? What else do you need from us to provide those resources? We're not just going to throw money at the problem, right? Is it more integrated fixed towers? Is it more manned and unmanned assets? Is it tactical drones? Is it, agent trade? Like, what is it that you need in order to push this to the border so that if we were to do that, you would see less and less coming through checkpoints, less and less incursions and public safety issues, because we're going to push that line of scrimmage south to the international boundary. What else do you need?
So, man, first of all, I agree with everything you just said. Specifically on the situational awareness, I completely agree. And that kind of goes exactly what I was saying about the confidence levels. I also want to challenge the leaders that when they tell me what their situational awareness is, tell me about what your confidence is with respect to that. Let's have those discussions. So I think you're spot on. And I think we do have absolutely the same goal. The goal is absolutely, let's try to interdict everything that we can right at the border. Right. Absolutely, that's the goal. It's a challenging and complex thing, but it's also an exciting thing as well, because it's about strengthening our counter-network ability. It's about reaching out to our partners, not just within the United States, but our international partners, Canada, Mexico, et cetera. It's not about just being positioned to interdict them when they hit the border. It's about bringing the fight to them before they get to the border. It's about identifying those TCOs. It's about dismantling those TCOs through a threat-based, intelligence-driven process before they get to the TCO. It's about setting up solid infrastructure, a whole of government approach, whether it's through corridor initiatives, whether it's through the joint task forces that are established, to make sure that we're working together, that we're gathering the intelligence, we're sharing the intelligence, and we're doing joint operations based on that intelligence to utilize our limited resources. So there's a whole apparatus about let's take the fight before they even get to the border. And then once they get to the border, as you laid it out, I agree. It's totally how you laid it out. And I even agree. You're right. We may be talking. Our goal would be is if we're that effective, we don't need additional stuff. Now, I would say, from my position, I think it could be unrealistic to say that no matter how good we are, that we're going to catch everything at the border. So I would always say part of the strategy should always be something in place that prevents us from having a single point of failure. I'm not saying checkpoints will always be that issue, but I think you understand what I mean. And so, yeah, so we have to continue to do that. The last part, what do I need? I need to continue that threat-based, intelligence-driven, operationally focused approach. I need to make sure that we have the resources to drive intelligence, to gather intelligence, to disseminate intelligence, to continue to drive those operations, to hopefully, as a counter-network approach, take the fight before they get to the border. So definitely looking at our intelligence resources. 132s, intelligence analysts. Do we need more? My gut says we do. With the rest of the resources, I don't think there would ever be a chief that sat before you said we wouldn't need more resources. I'm not going to be any different in that area, but I think I need some more time so that we do take care of the precious taxpayers' money to be able to really tell you what it is we need with respect to the infrastructure, the technology, and the manpower. And on the humanitarian side, absolutely. And the border, please, don't get me wrong, the Border Patrol agents, when I walked up, they didn't even know I was there. They were treating these kids with dignity, respect, and compassion like they were their own. Right. And we will do that, absolutely. But I'm just saying that there may be an alternative, like, for example, When I was a police officer for Los Angeles Police Department, I'd be working in the streets of South Central LA. I'd catch a felon. I'd hand him off to a jailer to process. I'd go back out in the street. So I don't know, can maybe we do something similar so that when we get one of the unaccompanied children, that we turn them over to somebody else that can do the processing, and then we get the agents back out on the line faster. That's something I'm taking a look at, and I'd ask your support for that, because obviously that will take some funding and some push to do that. The technology, that's an element too. You mentioned like the integrated fixed towers. You know that well. That's going to be a great resource in some areas. It doesn't work in other areas. You go to the Buffalo sector with the hills, that technology is not going to work. So we need to constantly look at additional technology. And so I'd probably be looking for support when we come up for additional technology.
Okay, great, thanks. I do want to go back to the agents and how the agents are used. We've heard from a couple of different sources that in the Tucson sector, we keep hearing the number about 25% of the agents are not assigned to patrolling the border. They're assigned to doing other things, vehicle officers and just other things that are not, it goes back to what you were just talking about. We train them to do a job, and we got to make sure that we keep the vast majority of them out there doing that job, right? Because that's what they're responsible for. That's what's going to build their morale, by the way, and their esprit de corps. They're out there doing the job they were trained to do. And not all these additional duties and details to other things that's really not their core responsibilities. Is that 25% number across the board, or do you have better clarity on how many or what percent of the agents are actually not patrolling?
So, ma'am, I've not seen or provided the 25% number, so it's pretty premature for me to weigh on that. What I would say is, it really depends on who you're talking to and their perspective. For example, as we talk about that threat-based intelligence-driven process, I am pushing folks, leaders out in the field, to put more people into task forces, right, to leverage and that kind of whole government approach. We should be integrated into the JTTFs, into the best teams, into the DEA-led strike forces. We need to be in the JTF West and East and et cetera. So we do need to push resources out there. Another thing that could be seen is at sometimes a sector, and I believe Tucson sector was impacted by this, when another sector like RGV is getting slammed with an increase, we'll mobilize the mobilization team, and they'll go to another sector to assist. So some people may have the perspective, they see that and they think they're being taken off the line, when really they're just being reallocated to a line somewhere else that we have a higher priority threat going on that we have to do. But again, I am taking a look at that. I'm asking the questions, the specialty units, do we have the right allocation? How many people, do we have off the line, and what are they specifically doing? Absolutely asking those questions, and that's a fair question that should be asked.
And Chief, I know this is just a snapshot in time, but could you get back to us with, of the agents that you have, just, with basic percentages and numbers, how many are generally out there on the line? How many are part of other taskings and other things, just, percentages. And I get that from being in the military. You need people in the operations center and all that kind of stuff in order to push good information. But if we could get a good sense from you and an answer back of where we are on those percentage-wise, and then continue the conversation of where it needs to be adjusted to.
Yes, ma'am. I actually want those numbers for myself as well.
Yeah, great.
So.
Thanks. And one last question related to on the second panel, we'll hear from Dr. Golub from the University of Arizona about the 2014 study they did with a series of recommendations to enhance really data collection and determining the success of whether the checkpoints are working and whether they're manned correctly and what things can be done to improve that. Have any of those recommendations been implemented, and do you agree or disagree with those recommendations?
Yes, ma'am. So I do know in part, again, it's something I still need to do a little bit deeper dive, but it has improved dramatically. We are tracking the number of seizures. We're tracking the number of apprehensions. We're tracking the number of man hours that are spent at checkpoints, and et cetera. So there are numerous data points that are being collected so that we can try to get closer to coming up with a really solid way to measure the effectiveness of the checkpoints.
Okay, but those specific recommendations from the U of A study, I don't know if you're familiar with them off the top of your head, but can you follow up on whether those specific, they put a lot of effort, taxpayer money, into studying as a follow-up from the 2009 GAO study, I think it was 2009, about, hey, how can we improve our understanding of the effectiveness of the checkpoints? So can you follow up with us those specific recommendations? Do you agree or disagree? And how many have been implemented or how many are in the process of being implemented?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan from South Carolina for a second round.
Thank you. I really don't have another question. I just wanted to tell the chief, I apologize that there's not more active participation today. We've got OGR with Hillary Clinton's emails, and there's just a lot going on the Hill. And I don't want you to leave here going, golly, there was only 2 members of Congress and had to answer all the chairwoman's questions and all that, and think there's not interest in this topic, because I can assure you that there is. Mr. Hurd came briefly. Barletta is very interested in visa overstays. Of course, all the way around with former chairwoman and others, even on the Democrat side, there is interest in this issue. And I think at some point in time, having another hearing, having you come back would be awesome. But I just didn't want you to leave here going, there's not any interest in Congress about what I'm doing. There absolutely is. It's just the way things go on the Hill sometimes. And just know that folks from my state, the Palmetto State, South Carolina, are very interested in this. We don't have a border. We have an international border, I guess you fly in. But anyway, thank you so much. God bless you. Godspeed. Thank you to you and your men, women that are serving this country in that capacity. And I look forward to meeting with you again. I wouldn't mind setting up something, privately to just get to know you a little better, because we want to work going forward. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman yields back. This wraps up this portion of our hearing. Thanks, Chief, for your testimony. There's potentially some questions that are going to come out of the second panel that we need to follow up with you on, and there may be other members of the committee that have questions for you. And so we'd ask when we submit those if we get those back in writing. And thanks for your testimony today. And you're dismissed. And the clerk will prepare the witnesses for the second panel. Thanks, Chief Morgan. All right, we ready? I'd like to thank the witnesses of our second panel today. First, introduce them, and then we'll start with the testimony. Mr. Gary Brasher, fifth-generation Arizonan, currently residing in Arizona's Santa Cruz Valley. Throughout his career, Mr. Brasher has established many local businesses, including full-service brokerage company, a water and a sewer company, a communications company, and a grocery store. Mr. Brasher is the past president of the Santa Cruz Valley Citizens Council, the Tubac Chamber of Commerce, and currently serves as the vice chair of the Green Valley Chamber of Commerce. Good to see you. Mrs. Peggy Davis is a rancher and farmer from the southern border area of Arizona, where she has resided for over 40 years. She currently serves as the clerk for the Whitewater Draw Natural Resource Conservation District, which assists local farmers and ranchers with projects to keep them informed of the most current methods and technologies available to sustain their farms and ranches for future generations. In recent years, she's become active in bringing a greater awareness to issues in her community associated with border security and illegal immigration. Dr. Elise Golub is the Executive Director of the National Center for Border Security and Immigration, or Borders, headquartered at the University of Arizona. Funded by the Department of Homeland Security, Borders provides cross-cutting technology and basic research to enhance the nation's security. Dr. Golub's expertise includes cross-border trade, economic development, and border management policy. She's currently conducting a joint research initiative with Frontex, the European Union Border Security Agency, based in Warsaw, where she recently organized a 2-day workshop for European border guards on artificial intelligence for screening and decision support at border crossings. Mr. Christian Ramirez is the director of Southern Border Communities Coalition and also serves as the Human Rights Director of Alliance San Diego. Since 1994, Mr. Ramirez has been active on issues relating to U.S. immigration policy and its impact on southern border communities. He has presented in international and national gatherings on the state of human rights in the U.S.-Mexico border. He's nationally recognized spokesperson on immigration and border enforcement issues. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Mr. Brasher for 5 minutes to testify. If you could put your microphone on.
There we go. Thank you, Chairwoman McSally, Ranking Member, and Vela, and members of the committee. My name is Gary Brasher. I won't go into a lot of detail on my background simply because the Congresswoman has already touched on that briefly. My written testimony, of course, will be in the record, so I have offered the opportunity for you to look at it in detail. I've lived in the Santa Cruz Valley for 34 years now as a businessman. As the Chairwoman expressed, I have a variety of businesses down there. It gives me the opportunity to be in the community and to really listen to what people are saying, not just my own experiences, but the experiences of others. I can tell you that the defense in depth strategy has had, and just a moment ago we heard the Chief say it's a multi-layered approach to the defense of our border. It's also had a variety of layers of impact on our communities, both south and north of that checkpoint. I can tell you that when the checkpoint is moved 25 miles north of the actual border, or as was referred to earlier, the line of scrimmage is moved, it creates, instead of a 261-mile border to defend, you can quickly see the math, it creates a 6,500 square mile area that the chief and his officers have to now defend. That exponentially increases the manpower needed and the area that they have to defend exponentially. It's created, unfortunately for those of us south of the checkpoint, what we call kind of a no man's land, an area south of the fixed checkpoint, but north of the actual border. Once individuals involved in the bringing illegal immigrants or bringing illegal contraband into the United States, once they get across that actual border, they, for the most part, have a pretty free run within that 25-mile area. And the unfortunate thing for those of us that live there is that that's where we live. That's where we work, that's where our children go to school. So that area that we call the no man's land is where we live every single day of our lives. And as was pointed out earlier, there's, without question, the flanking of that checkpoint takes place in the Santa Cruz Valley, without question. There are a number of routes, and I put a map on my testimony so that you can look at those these routes formally. But there's a gas line down that runs north and south through the Santa Cruz Valley around the checkpoint. There's a power line that runs north and south around the checkpoint. There's the Santa Cruz River, which provides a great deal of canopy and cover for anybody involved in illegal activity to circumvent the checkpoint, to get around it. And that's, again, that's where our communities are. That's where our subdivisions are. That's where our businesses are, and people live in those areas. So this policy of actually putting people in direct contact with those who are involved in illegal activity is frankly mind-boggling to me. We have to deal with it every day. I've had people show up at my home. I live in a subdivision just west of the checkpoint. a little bit west of the gas line. I've had individuals show up at my front door who are bleeding all over, who've been shot. They were apparently in some kind of an altercation with rival gangs trying to steal the drugs they were bringing across. I've talked to businessmen time after time about people who are just simply concerned about coming south of the checkpoint. In many cases, and I know this sounds, there might be some that are skeptical about this, but there are people who won't come down to our particular area because they think they need a passport to get, quote, back into the United States. Or they're afraid to go through the checkpoint simply because they're not used to that level of, I'll use the term militarization. Someone from Wisconsin who comes down to the Two-Back Golf Resort as an example to play golf or play in a golf tournament or have a luncheon or go to a convention, and they have to go back through the checkpoint for the first time for most of them in their lives. They're exposed to drug-sniffing dogs. They're exposed to people with semi-automatic weapons strapped across their chest. They're exposed to maybe having to go to secondary and have their car looked at more carefully. And so when they're making a determination on where to go for an event, where to go for a conference, where to go even for a wedding, and they think about having to go back through that checkpoint or their guests, many of them are just opting not to even come down. They're just going to stay north of the checkpoint at some point. I fully recognize what the chief said earlier. They have a tough job. And I want to reiterate that the vast majority of people in the Santa Cruz Valley fully support our Border Patrol, fully support the tough job that they have to do. They have a very difficult job and one that carries with it a lot of risk. However, having said that, this multi-layered, multi-tiered checkpoint strategy has had tremendous negative impacts on those communities both north and south of the border. The staging that takes place once they get across the border, meaning staging up to decide how they're going to flank that particular facility, puts them in our communities on oftentimes a long-term basis, not minutes or hours, but days. Then the activity of actually flanking the checkpoint puts them oftentimes in direct contact with those of us who do business or who live there. Another risk. And I don't want to miss our friends to the north of the checkpoint, primarily in the communities of Green Valley and Sahuarita. They too have an impact. When those involved in illegal activity flank the checkpoint, come around, then they reload in those communities. That's where they re-engage with their rides going further north. And that reconnecting puts people at risk. I know one hotelier in the Green Valley area, just as an example, who has lost tremendous amounts of business. Unfortunately, there's a large wash directly behind his hotel that's one of these reconnection points. And you can imagine, as people are sitting in their hotel room looking down, observing all of this activity going on, they've again just decided not to come to that particular facility. The high-speed chases that oftentimes are the result of Border Patrol trying to do their job, trying to catch those involved in illegal activity, circumventing the checkpoint. So whether you're in the area south of the checkpoint, in the area where things are staged, whether you're in the area immediately surrounding the checkpoint, where those involved in illegal activity are flanking, or whether you're north of the checkpoint, where those that have gotten past the checkpoint then reconnect with their rides, it has created tremendous number of consequences for those of us that live in that community. I had said earlier, or I said in my written testimony.
And if you could wrap it up, we're over time. But
Absolutely, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
With that said, I'll just simply say that I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and speak with you. The impacts, whether intended or not, are very real for those of us that live in the area. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mr. Brasher. And we'll get more into the discussion, but thanks for the testimony. The chair now recognizes Mrs. Davis for 5 minutes.
Yes, Chairwoman McSally, members of the committee. Yes, I'll try again. Chairwoman and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity today. Border checkpoints are not always staffed and they're not always open. If the resources used to staff them were directly at the border, then they would interdict illegal activity before it actually reaches the interior. Our ranch is 25 miles north, and our family has been in Cochise County since 1867. We have always had some illegals, but in 1986 we saw hordes of them and a change in their attitude. They began to be destructive. They cut fences, drained water lines, killed animals, robbed homes, stole vehicles, trampled grass, and left tons of trash. In the trash, we've found plastic, backpacks, blankets, diapers, hypodermic needles, medicines, human waste, and pregnancy tests. Trash from Mexico is hazardous to us and has killed cows because they eat blankets and plastic bags. By 1995, the trash was out of control, so the county hauled away 16 dump truck loads just from a small area on our ranch. And that's just one example. Environmental damage is extensive on the border. Illegals came through by the millions. They trampled grazing land, destroyed foliage, drained millions of gallons of water used by wildlife. The damage has changed the landscape. Footpaths caused soil erosion when the rains came. Wildlife waters were destroyed because of human waste. The Tucson sector chief at the time, David Aguilar, was the architect of the defense in-depth strategy. In 2000, he actually came to our home and explained that Operation Hold the Line in El Paso focused on intercepting and preventing illegal entries at the border. And Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego proved to be very effective. This forced the illegal activity into the rural areas of Arizona. The plan was designed to secure the cities where they have seconds or minutes to catch illegals. But instead of putting agents near the border in the rural areas, they would be deployed 25 miles or more north of the border to allow hours or days to catch them. If the El Paso plan worked so well, then why doesn't the Border Patrol do the same thing in the rural areas, I ask. Residents along the border have begged for agents to be on the border for over 15 years. Even though the success of Hold the Line and Gatekeeper were due to stopping the flow of illegal traffic directly at the border, we've been told that it would not work or that it was too dangerous. If the border is too dangerous for agents, then why is it not too dangerous for residents? Chief Aguilar made the following statement to the Arizona Republic. The border is not a defined line, but a corridor between the U.S. and Mexico. This corridor is at least 30 miles inside the interior. How can a government official state that the border is not a boundary? We hear repeatedly that agents are on the border, but when Border Patrol refers to agents on the border, they're actually referring to the 30-plus mile corridor instead of the international boundary. In 2010, our friend Robert Krentz was murdered in his own property 30 miles north of the border. Rob stopped to help an illegal pretending to be injured. As he stopped, the man shot him. The checkpoint nearest to me is 15 miles north and is open only if weather permits. Another is rarely open, being the checkpoints cannot be manned 24/7. Those agents should be deployed very close to the border instead. John Ladd's ranch is on the border with 10 miles of 13-foot metal wall fencing and $42 million of government infrastructure. Drug cartels frequently cut the fence and drive their loads 3 miles north to the nearest highway. Then they drive back through the opening in the fence. Sometimes they even weld it back in place. In a 26-month time period, 54 trucks have accomplished this task, and only one was caught. The Brian Terry station was only 4 miles away. Brian Terry was also inside Aguilar's corridor when he was killed. Cartel scouts camp on mountains within Aguilar's corridor and report Border Patrol activities to the drug cartel. The San Pedro River runs out of Mexico into the U.S., and across the river is a 3-mile strand barbed wire fence. Occasionally, one agent is watching this quarter-mile area. For 3 to 4 months in the summer, floodgates are raised in the border fence to allow flood water out of Mexico into the U.S. Border Patrol covers the holes in the fence with just 3 strands of barbed wire, and anyone can walk in. Signs such as this one are not uncommon in the corridor. I am aghast that our border is so poorly protected that these signs are necessary. Diversionary fires in Aguilar's corridor have been set by drug runners. They have destroyed hundreds of thousands of acres of forest, grassland, wildlife, and homes. Also, land values have dropped to about half of their previous value. In closing, checkpoints would not be necessary if the agents were on the border. And I have additional comments and examples in my written record, and I thank you for your time. And I just want to say that I do respect the Border Patrol and the daunting task that they have on a daily basis. I just think that it's time to move on and change the strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Appreciate it. And the chair now recognizes Dr. Golub for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman McSally and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here to address you today. I am the Executive Director of the National Center for Border Security and Immigration, known as Borders, headquartered at the University of Arizona. From 2008 to 2016, we were designated a Center of Excellence by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate, Office of University Programs. Since that time, we continue to receive funding from DHS, from DOD, IARPA, as well as other international agencies to conduct this work. And we are a proud member of the new Center of Excellence headquartered at the University of Houston. In 2009, the GAO came out with a report assessing interior traffic checkpoints and recommended that Border Patrol implement improvements in 4 different areas. First area is data quality and integrity. Second area is to examine the impacts these checkpoints have on local communities. Third, to determine how effective these checkpoints actually are, what is their performance effectiveness. And fourth, to develop a managerial tool for better managing the number of lanes, the hours, and the resources allocated to these checkpoints. The University of Arizona was provided with $500,000 to conduct this study. During the course of the study, we worked closely with Border Patrol, specifically the Office of Strategic Planning, Policy, and Analysis. We submitted bi-monthly reports. We were assigned a point of contact in the agency, and we provided regular briefings to headquarters personnel. So we did not operate in a vacuum. We walked hand in hand with Border Patrol throughout this process. To conduct this study, we paid site visits to 7 sectors, 6 on the southern border and 1 on the northern border, to observe the checkpoint operations. At these checkpoints, we received briefings from the chief. We observed operations and we interviewed agents there. We also were provided with apprehension data from the E3 system, cleansed data without identifying factors for a period of 2008 to 2011, as well as checkpoint activity reports. For community impacts, we conducted interviews with local community members near the border, specifically local law enforcement, resort owners, business owners, school officials, as well as citizens. For the performance measures, we did an in-depth review of various strategies for measuring effectiveness, and for the managerial tool, we developed a checkpoint simulation model. To our findings, specifically in the area of data quality and integrity, the gold standard for data quality is accuracy, consistency, and comprehensiveness of the data. And analyzing droves of E3 apprehension data, we determined there were still a lot of errors and inconsistencies and data that was entered incorrectly. We were assured by Border Patrol that measures have been taken to improve data collection, and we provided them with a list of recommendations, including agent refresher training courses, drop-down menus, automatic alerts, and other measures to prevent these data issues. In the area of community impacts, we found that interviewing community members, their concerns fell into 3 general areas. The first area was inconvenience factors, wait times at the checkpoints, missed meetings, and so forth. The second factor was circumvention impacts because of illegal activity trying to circumvent the checkpoint. Neighboring communities voiced that they experienced public safety issues and high-speed chases through their neighborhoods. And finally, economic harm. We found that there was a widespread perception that there was harm to the local community based on loss of tourism and depressed housing prices because of a public perception that the border was a dangerous area. In terms of recommendations for community impacts, we analyzed circumvention data around the I-19 corridor, which we used as our case study, and found that indeed communities south of the checkpoint, such as Tubac, had more circumvention apprehensions than communities north of the border. So this is one area that we recommended that Border Patrol continue to monitor, the circumvention and neighboring activities. As far as real estate prices, we looked at housing prices for communities south of the border, Rio Rico, and south of the checkpoint, Rio Rico and Tubac, and north of the border in Green Valley, and found that while the data indicated there was some loss in the prices south of the checkpoint in Tubac, that they were not statistically significant enough to definitively say that the checkpoint caused the difference. This was complicated by the fact that our real estate data collection overlapped with the housing crisis and the general U.S. Economic crisis, 2008 to 2010, so further research is needed on the area. I'll conclude with talking about the effectiveness of checkpoints, since this is an issue that Chairwoman McSally raised. Right now, checkpoints are measured by their apprehensions and their seizures. And I can stress strongly enough that this is an activity measure. It is not an effectiveness measure. If you don't know how much illicit activity is getting through, you don't know how effectively you're performing. If 100 apprehensions are made a day and 101 people try to get through, you're doing pretty well. If 100 apprehensions are made a day, but 1,000 people are trying to get through, then you're only 10% effective. We provided specific recommendations to Border Patrol that the most practical, efficient, and non-biased way of measuring checkpoint effectiveness is by conducting red teaming efforts, which refers to a team of agents from different federal agencies who in effect play act the role of smugglers or illegal immigrants attempting to get through a checkpoint, carefully trained with a specific script. And then an evaluation could be made of how many members of the Red Team Border Patrol catches at the checkpoint. This interdiction data can provide a proxy for what the base level, what the denominator of illegal activity is getting through, and can be used by checkpoints to measure their effectiveness level.
If you wouldn't mind wrapping up, and then we can maybe get more into that in the Q&A.
Certainly.
Thank you.
And in terms of performance models, we developed a simulation model measuring current and predicted traffic flows and resource allocations at Border Patrol that they could use to determine the adequate levels. And I'd be happy to answer questions during the next period.
Thank you, Dr. Golub. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Ramirez for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify. I represent the Southern Border Communities Coalition, which brings together over 60 community organizations in the 4 southern border states. I was born in the borderlands. They are my home. I know the subcommittee will agree that the southern border is one of our nation's most beautiful, vibrant, and unique regions. It includes remarkable desert landscapes, the scenic Rio Grande River, distinctive mountains, and extraordinary valleys. Several important binational metropolitan areas make up the borderlands, and hundreds of thousands of acres of sensitive habitat protect endangered species. Ancestral indigenous communities have called the borderlands home. since before the physical structure divided their people. Ancient roots are now bisected by modern borders. Nearly 12 million people call our precious borderlands home. The southern border is also an economic engine for North America. 56 crossing points provide critical gateways to our third largest goods trading partner, where nearly 300,000 vehicle crossings occur daily. U.S. trade with Mexico totaled $583 billion in 2015. The border landscape also includes a heavy presence of federal law enforcement, making the southern border one of the most militarized regions in the Western Hemisphere. In the year 2000, there were 8,600 Border Patrol agents. By 2014, that numbered more than doubled to almost 21,000. Border enforcement spending increased sevenfold from 1980 to 1995, and then more than tripled from 1995 to 2003. Appropriations for Border Patrol have grown steadily from $1 billion in FY 2000 to over $13 billion in FY 2016. However, this dramatic increase of CBP personnel and equipment has not been accompanied by commensurate accountability, oversight, and transparency mechanisms, leading to palpable mistrust between southern border residents and CBP, the largest law enforcement agency in our nation. Based on outdated rules created without significant public debate, DHS has interpreted Section 287A3 of the Immigration Nationality Act to allow Border Patrol to operate interior checkpoints and engage in other enforcement up to 100 miles from land and maritime borders. Virtually everyone that I know has been subjected to questioning at checkpoints. In some communities, residents must pass through Border Patrol checkpoints to reach work, school, medical appointment, places of worship. This has an enormous economic and civil rights impact on our communities. Even I feel compelled to carry proof of citizenship at all times in order to prevent unnecessary delays or worse. Perhaps what is most hurtful is that my toddler son must also have a U.S. passport in order to clear the checkpoint whenever we drive east to visit his grandparents in Imperial County, or if we decide to go north, to go to Disneyland. My family must show our passports to prove U.S. citizenship. As you may know, U.S. citizens are not required to carry proof of citizenship, but we do so because Border Patrol agents too often treat us as second-class citizens. For border residents, the land of the free that most enjoy has been converted into the land of checkpoints. In no other part of this nation are people required to prove who they are as they go about their daily lives. As director of the Southern Border Communities Coalition, I see and experience firsthand the grave impact CBP's excessive footprint has on residents all along the border. In the small town of Arivaca, hundreds of community members have rallied against racial profiling of their neighbors at checkpoints that choke off their daily activities. In southern New Mexico, my good friend Jorge grew up commuting through government checkpoints from his hometown in Salem to Las Cruces, to grocery shop, to see a movie, and most recently, to obtain a master's degree from New Mexico State University. Jorge is always respectfully confirming his U.S. citizenship to agents, but agents have interrogated him about where he was born and detained him for a dog to sniff his vehicle because he refused to consent to a search. In the RGV, residents have refused to evacuate their homes in weather-related emergencies for fear that they will be apprehended by Border Patrol. My colleagues in Brooks County contend with hundreds of tragic migrant deaths each year because the Falfurrias checkpoint is placed 50 miles north of the actual border. CBP fails to assess the impact of defense in depth on human and civil rights and on our quality of life in border residents. Our friends along the northern border have also endured enforcement practices that undermine the trust between border residents and CBP. From Washington State to the streets of Detroit to upstate New York, border residents experience excessive use of force, racial profiling, and unconstitutional searches and seizures. No one is more concerned about the security of the homeland than border residents, but we are equally concerned about our quality of life. Congress should reduce the reach CBP operations to a maximum of 25 miles from the land or maritime border, and reduce the area where agents can enter private property without a warrant to 10 miles. DHS and CBP must immediately ban racial profiling and implement a comprehensive data collection and public reporting on Border Patrol's activities. We urge CBP to implement Commissioner Kerlikowski's transparency and accountability reforms, including body-worn cameras, with a strong policy framework and an effective responsive complaint system. Ultimately, border residents want what our fellow citizens already enjoy: the ability to move from point A to point B without excessive government intrusion. I remain hopeful that one day my son will be able to visit his grandparents without the indignity of armed agents at a checkpoint interrogating him about whether he belongs in this nation or not. I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. The chair, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for a first round of questions. I appreciate the testimony of the second panel, and I will just share that, my perspective as the chairwoman of this subcommittee is oftentimes in Washington, D.C., people are looking for areas of disagreement and divisiveness so that people can take their corners and put their jerseys on and figure out, where we can find the biggest controversy. My intent in this leadership position and with this subcommittee hearing is to look for areas of agreement, look for areas where across the spectrum and from different perspectives that we can find some understanding and common ground, which needs to be based on facts and needs to be based on the experiences of the people that all of you are representing and the facts, Dr. Golub, of the studies that you have done related to the impact of the current strategy on our communities. So I appreciate all of your testimonies, both written and summarized and verbal, in order to present and highlight for the record the challenges that communities are having with the defense in depth strategy, which includes the checkpoints. And I believe that we can, between Border Patrol leadership, Border Patrol agents, and those that are residents in the border region, we can find where those Venn diagrams overlap as all Americans to identify solutions that are going to have the objective of keeping our country safe, keeping our community safe, preserving our civil liberties, and making sure that our border communities are not being impacted negatively, economically, environmentally, across the board, all the things that have been presented here today. These are things that are not in contradiction with each other. And I do appreciate that the perspectives of this second panel has shown where, again, we can, I think, come to places of agreement that there are negative impacts that need to be addressed. And people across the political spectrum would agree that there's things that we need to be doing maybe better and differently in order to secure our border, keep our country safe, keep our community safe, protect our civil liberties, and provide opportunity for individuals, small businesses, communities to be able to grow and prosper and meet their economic potential and not have negative impacts from the strategy that we currently have. So I really appreciate the different perspectives from everybody on the panel today. In follow-up questions, I know you all didn't get to some of the things that were in your written testimony. I'll start with Mr. Brasher. Again, we've had conversations on multiple occasions about the impact in southern Arizona of specifically the checkpoints and the defense in-depth strategy. So you're now Chief Morgan. You're now responsible for the mission of keeping these very communities that you're advocating for safe. Based on what I know, you've had multiple conversations and studies about this issue, but if we want to make sure we also come with solutions, right? So if you're in charge, what would you shift the strategy to be? Because if we just today got rid of checkpoints, but we didn't adjust the strategy, then if you look at the numbers, I mean, that's not necessarily making us safer, right? That's not necessarily stopping the cartels, and that's actually going to have, I think, a negative implication. So if you're in charge, what would you do differently, and how would that happen in order to address the issues that you've been able to address today in your testimony?
You bet. Thank you, Chairman McSally. And again, I agree with your comment just a moment ago. I think we are looking for that overlap. But to the point specifically that you asked, I think there's a variety of things actually that can be done, and I think some of them are already being employed by the Border Patrol to one level or another already. I think rebuilding the port of entry was a huge first step, by the way, so that there was more technology available at the border as trucks and others are coming across. So I think that was a big step. But I also think that, and it was referred to earlier by Chief Morgan, I think that the use of aerial vehicles, whether they be drones or helicopters, but I think there's technology certainly that can be giving real-time information to our agents on the ground about what's happening right now. So I think that's another technology that can be used. I think, in addition, the vehicle barriers that have been used with, I think, a great deal of success in areas that that is likely for those involved in illegal activity to cross. So I think the drones, I think the vehicle barriers. I also think that for those areas that are very rough and somewhat inaccessible along the border, I understand that the Border Patrol has used what they call the FOBs, or the forward operating bases, where they have agents actually out there on horseback and in some cases with backpacks, patrolling and monitoring those areas. I think something as simple, quite frankly, as sharing intelligence with local law enforcement, the sheriffs and the police departments in Nogales, things of that nature. I know that there's been some holdups in the communication element so that these people of varying agencies can talk together on the radio in real time because they use different bandwidths and things. So I think that's an area that could be looked at. And I also think, I know some time ago a virtual fence was looked into, and I know that technology had some challenges to it, but I think now we're far enough down the road that hopefully some of those challenges have been overcome, and the use of virtual technology would play a more significant role. So I think there's no silver bullet from my perspective of one thing we can do, but I think using all those things in combination would help.
Great. Ms. Davis, same question. You're now in charge of the Border Patrol. Again, you've shared some of it in your verbal and your written testimony, representing the ranchers and the border residents in our community in southern Arizona. What would you recommend we do?
I think that Chief Morgan is making a really good first step. I do exactly what he's doing right now, in that he's going to every single sector and finding out what their individual needs are, because I have friends all along the border, from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas, and every sector is really different. I spoke with Mr. Morgan this morning and briefly, and I said, I understand that each sector, it's bad all across the border, but it's different bad, which is not a very grammatically correct statement, but it is different bad. They're all different. He's got to find out what's unique about each one and figure out what works better in that particular sector. And really just reaching out, building a personal relationship with all those sector chiefs. I think there's a disconnect sector to sector along the border. From 40 years of history with the border, I see that just in Arizona. There's not any cohesiveness, or it's not run the same way in each sector. So what happens in say in Santa Cruz County or the Sonoyta sector is not what happens in the Douglas sector in clear over in McAllen, Texas. There needs to be continuity along the border. And I don't know how he accomplishes that. I know I'm him right now, but I don't know how I accomplish that except to communicate, and just really outline the problems of each specific sector and how they relate to each other, because they all neighbor each other along the border. You have to become good neighbors with those people and decide what is acceptable in this sector and what's acceptable in this one, and make them cohesive.
So not a one-size-fits-all,
Right.
but also being adaptable and nimble, right? Because
Exactly.
the bad guys are going to be nimble as well, right?
Right, they're going to move, they're going to do their thing. And where there's, like the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, wherever you stop it up, they're going to go around.
Great.
And let me just say that I too agree with Mr. Ramirez that none of us like to be profiled. None of us do. I don't necessarily appreciate having a police force presence either, but I know we have to have some strong leadership and backup, and I can see that happening if there's more communication.
Great, thanks, Ms. Davis. Dr. Golub, I don't know if you find yourself in a position to be able to answer that question, not just for the study on the checkpoints, but all the research and the efforts that have happened at the university with the Border Center of Excellence. Do you have any perspective, if you were in charge, how you would address things differently?
Certainly, if I was wearing the green hat, I think there are some low-lying issues that would be relatively easy for Border Patrol to implement, specifically the data integrity and quality issues are fairly straightforward. Any smart master's or doctoral student could implement them in a short amount of time. I know getting the funds for technology change isn't as easy as it may sound in dealing with an agency's budget, but those are relatively quick, inexpensive changes that can be made, as well as the simulation model for checkpoints for managing traffic and resource allocation is a relatively easy thing to fix. The harder level issues to address are first the efficiency and effectiveness issues. It's difficult for an agency to undergo a test and evaluation of how well they're performing. We've all had job evaluations that had us in a high sense of nervousness, and but I think it's ultimately to Border Patrol and the nation's benefit for an objective assessment of their performance effectiveness, be it by red teaming as we recommended or some other measure. We as the citizens need to know how well checkpoints are doing before we can decide what to do about them. And finally, community impacts. That's a much messier issue to address because it encompasses so many factors, as the other panel members addressed. But from my perspective, trying to see which data can be analyzed, can be put in a quantitative form, such as housing prices, such as school lockdowns, such as incidences of profiling. By gathering that data, Border Patrol can present a more accurate and transparent picture to the border residents.
Great, thank you, Dr. Golub. Mr. Ramirez?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I will agree with Dr. Golub. One of the things that we need to know is how effective are these checkpoints. And without that transparency, without that accountability, without that oversight, what has created has been a mistrust between local residents and CBP. And I think that should be our biggest concern. No one, we enjoy wonderful relationships with local law enforcement. And we know that the best way to provide public safety is by ensuring that local residents could call the local police station and say, I see something that's suspect here.
Right.
Can you come check it out? I'll tell you, when it comes to Border Patrol, that's not the case. We have serious problems with corruption. We have a perception in the public that this agency operates with impunity, that lacks transparency. But I think that the commissioner has taken important steps in the last couple of years. We've been engaged in a very robust conversation with the commissioner, southern border, northern border communities. I think that Chief Morgan, in his previous capacity at CVP, when he was heading internal affairs, in an interim capacity, created the conditions for more transparency. Without those transparency, accountability, and oversight mechanisms that are urgently needed in CVP, it's very difficult to have communities say, you know what, I'm going to call Border Patrol if I see something going on because of the experiences that I described. We all have been mistreated. And what makes me suspect is the color of my skin. And unless we reverse that and follow and force DHS to follow the same guidelines the Department of Justice has done in terms of banning racial profiling, it will be very difficult to regain that trust. However, I do want to reiterate that the Commissioner has taken wonderful steps in the direction of added accountability and oversight, but we need to make sure that we implement those reforms as soon as possible so that we could narrow the gap between communities and CBP.
Great, thank you. The chair now recognizes my colleague from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee, for 5 minutes.
Let me thank the chairwoman very much, and let me specifically say to our witnesses, I appreciate very much your testimony. I was delayed because I was in a meeting on criminal justice reform, but I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to at least hear some of the very important testimony. I want to say to Ms. Davis and Mr. Brasher, that is the reason that we have what we call the People's House, for you to petition your government. I have heard you. I am from Texas, spent a lot of time on the border, walking the border, traveling to the border, traveling over the border to Mexico, looking at the resources. I've been on the Homeland Security Committee. We were in the few days after 9/11. I came on this committee in its formulation, when we formulated the Homeland Security Committee. And if there was anything embedded in my heart, it was to protect the American people. So I want to just add some comments. When I co-chaired this committee, or was the ranking member with Candace Miller from Michigan, the northern border, we wrote the 1417, the Border Results Act of 2013. It was a bipartisan, comprehensive border security bill. Now, it insisted on 90% operational control, and I'd always be eager to raise that number, but that was its initial writing of the illegal border crosses. That's certainly far from where we are today. We're not at that. And I think what was good about it is that it directed the Secretary of the Department to develop and report to Congress for approval a national strategy to gain and maintain operational control of the nation's border. And that's what I'm hearing you say, and I'm going to just ask a brief question about that, because to live your lives, to have operational control would be great, that you could know what was going on, contain those who are illegally crossing. But it also gave the direction for advanced technology and from existing taxpayer-owned Department of Defense technology being brought back from Iraq and Afghanistan. We've got a lot of overlap and a lot of opportunities to use some of the talents and work that was already. But I think what was important about this for Mr. Ramirez as well, it required our oversight agency, that's the General Accounting Office, that's the numbers guys, to do an independent investigative team or arm of Congress to verify the viability of the department's strategy. Were they meeting their goals, the implementation plan, the metrics and results? And that's what I hear all of you saying, let's get something that works. So I just want to ask a brief question to Mr. Brash, and then I have some questions for Mr. Ramirez, and I want to thank Dr. Golub, because we need academics dealing with this issue. Mr. Brasher, you want something that works at the border. Is that my understanding?
Yes, yes, Congresswoman.
And so there's discussion about moving the line of scrimmage, and certainly I think we need to listen to you. So my point would be, in making that determination, is the data, do you want us to listen to you, but also to do that pilot or to implement going forward on enhanced border security, but getting the data and making sure we're getting it right? Would that be helpful to you?
Yes, Congressman, absolutely. I'm not suggesting we go out, excuse the term, willy-nilly and just start changing things. I think to get the data, as Ms. Golub indicated, and then sitting down and having a cogent discussion about where that overlap is and what solutions exist.
Ms. Davis, listening to you articulate, I want to immediately give you solutions, but the data, is that important to you so that we get the results that you need to have for you to continue your business and your life?
Well, data is important, of course. I think it always is. You know, it's an important thing to know, and when you see it change over the years, you know that something's either being helped or hindered. But I think as we live day to day, those of us who live in the borderlands, we feel it.
Right.
More than anything. And I think it's important to note that it's not just about my safety or my family's safety. I feel like this is my country, and national security is at risk. And I think that you would have a more humanitarian approach if you stop the traffic at the border. I don't think you'd have the deaths. I mean, every rancher I know has found dead bodies on their property. And
I've been there.
It's disheartening when you find that. You feel for these people. I don't want people to think that we're not humanitarian, because I've taken care of a lot of illegals that have come through over the years with medicine and help and water and food and all of the above. But while figures are important, I can see it and I can feel it on a daily basis, whether it's working or not.
Well, that was the underlying premise of the legislation that we drafted a year or two ago, which is actually action. It was at that time called the Border Results Act of 2013. So we want to do that as well. Let me go on to Dr. Golub, and then the chairwoman yields. I'd like to be able to ask Mr. Ramirez a question. Dr. Golub, The former commissioner, and as I understand Commissioner Morgan's testimony that he's just been here for a while, that he has to get his hands around the issue. He wants to determine whether the resources are being used in the right place. And our previous Commissioner Gerlosky committed to reviewing checkpoint data to assess their efficiency as a border security tool and to justify the use of resources. As we listen to Ms. Davis and Ms. Brasher, they have said results. In your academic analysis, would that be a good methodology for the government to do to make sure these resources tell us what scrimmage line we should be at? Dr. Golub?
Yes, with the caveat that we need to understand what data is being provided to us and what it's actually measuring. You know, as we discussed before, apprehension data in itself is only giving you a snapshot in time of what's happening. We have to understand how much activity is going through and what percentage of that unknown level of activity the apprehension data is capturing. And only till we know that and develop a proxy data for measuring the unknown quantity of illegal activity can we know how effective apprehension data is. Otherwise, the apprehension data and other similar snapshots can be interpreted or manipulated over time.
Knowledge is actually power. I indicated how long I've been on this committee, and it was at a time when our Border Patrol agents were at a very small number. We collectively, in a bipartisan manner, enhanced those numbers, but also I was out on the border with Border Patrol agents at night, and we gave simple things like night goggles, laptops, which a decade or so ago they did not have. So I am very cognizant of that. As I am cognizant, I think, Doctor, that your work can also enhance Mr. Ramirez's concern when we talk about making sure if we get the right information that we don't violate the civil liberties of individuals and certainly Americans. And I thank you for that. Thank you for that instruction. I just want to move to Mr. Ramirez, if I can, and acknowledge the point of what you spoke, Mr. Ramirez, and that is, of course, people who reside along the southern border, especially those Americans of Mexican ancestry or Hispanic descent that have resided in the United States for eons, and certainly, as you well know, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, certainly there are iconic families, and we have worked together with the Mexican-American community for decades, centuries, ongoing. It is important that those generational linkages bestows upon them and all citizens their civil liberties. I'm concerned about the great work that you're doing, and if I might just pose for a moment the question that I hope one or two that you can answer. The GAO has previously reported that a component of the strategy for checkpoints is to cause illegal entrants to use less traveled secondary roads on which they are more visible. Moreover, GAO's report that the Border Patrol officials stated that other priorities sometimes precluded positioning more than a minimum number of agents and resources on checkpoint circumvention occurs. Has the Border Patrol taken steps, and you're working with them over the years, to minimize the danger to migrants who may seek to circumvent the checkpoints? Has it tried to minimize the impact on surrounding neighborhoods, ranches, and communities? What more must be done?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for your comments and your question. As I mentioned earlier, the last 2 years, Commissioner Kerlikowske and his team have been diligent about meeting with southern border and northern border communities. However, there is a huge mistrust between CBP and border communities, particularly people of color living in the southern border, and increasingly so along the northern border with Canada. There are some commitments that the Commissioner has made in terms of deploying, for instance, body-worn cameras to ensure that CBP, the largest law enforcement agency in the nation, complies with 21st century policing best practices. That was a commitment that was made several years ago, and we have not yet seen the implementation of body-worn cameras. We have urged the Department of Homeland Security to follow the example of the Department of Justice in issuing guidance on racial profiling, and DHS still has not, is behind. So without having those basic policies in place, it is very difficult for CBP to continue to do its important mission without gaining the trust of families, as you mentioned, Congresswoman, who have been there even before the border was there. And it is about time that the largest law enforcement agency in this nation leads by example in the important conversation that we are having in this nation about policing reform. Without those basic components, Congresswoman, I would say that it will be very difficult for CBP to gain the trust of not only of residents, but of our local and state elected officials. So in order for us to reevaluate the checkpoints, we need to make sure that local elected officials, that school districts, that tribal governments are also part of the conversation to look at what is the impact of checkpoints in our daily lives. And we haven't had that conversation ever. The time to have that conversation is now, and that's why I appreciate very much this subcommittee having an opportunity for us finally to have an important conversation about the impact that checkpoints have on our daily lives.
Let me quickly wrap up and just make this point and ask two questions. First of all, I think the chairwoman knows I am a strong supporter of comprehensive immigration reform that is a holistic view of access to citizenship, but also the strong handling of the border. I'm not a person who runs away from that issue, and I don't think you run away from it. I just noticed that the Border Patrol had a strategic plan, and probably in the previous commissioner now going on border community liaison program, ranch liaison, and town hall meetings, which I hope that Ms. Davis and Mr. Brasher have been involved, and I hope you've been involved. If not, this is something we want to encourage, because this is how they hear about the concerns on the ground. I want to just pose these questions because I don't hear any adverse viewpoint from you about the responsibilities of the federal government securing the border. But you're looking at the way to do it and the way to respect all of the citizens that travel. So would you share with me some of your civil liberties challenges and concerns with stopping that is going on? And might I qualify this by saying, having worked with them, having spoken to them in large numbers, able, hardworking public servants, Border Patrol agents are. I know that many of them have to leave their family. Their post is somewhere else from where their family is. So let me publicly thank them for their service. What we're trying to do here is to make a matrix that will work. So if you would share that and share as well the comment that you made about racial profiling. Maybe you have an anecdotal assessment so that we can look at how we use Border Patrol checkpoints to make them effective for the law enforcement duties, but also comport with the very basic value of this nation is the equality of all persons. If you could talk about the civil liberties that you see and the issue of racial profiling.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. Perhaps the biggest travesty in the border region, and one that, regardless of where we stand on the issue of immigration reform, is the moral obligation we have as a nation to stop the deaths of our brothers and sisters coming across the border. Operation Gatekeeper and Operation Hold the Line were mentioned earlier with Chief Morgan, and those two policies are directly responsible for the deaths of thousands of folks. More than 20 years later, the time has come for us to reevaluate that moral weight that we have on our nation's shoulders. So addressing that issue is important. We have worked with the commissioner to do things like deploy rescue beacons so that when folks are in distress, they could press a button, a signal we sent, and we could then deploy the search and rescue elite team of the Border Patrol to prevent that death. That is perhaps the #1 civil rights atrocity that we're facing in the border. And all of us, I believe, have seen the ill effects that that has on our communities. When it comes to the issues of racial profiling, Congresswoman, I mentioned earlier, I can't leave my hometown of San Diego without going through a checkpoint. I want to visit my in-laws in the neighboring county to the east. I have to go through a checkpoint, and I have to carry my U.S. passport with me, and my child has to also carry his U.S. passport with him to visit his grandparents. If we want to go to Disneyland, it's the same thing to the north. The time to end the shameful practice of racial profiling has come, and the entity that must lead by example is the largest law enforcement agency in this nation, which is Customs and Border Protection. The Department of Justice has issued guidance in that regard. The White House has issued guidelines for 21st century policing. That is the #1 civil rights violation that we're facing as U.S. citizens in our own country. I have to show proof of citizenship when I want to take my child to visit his grandparents in the United States. We have never left the nation. So that is perhaps the most dramatic impact that this lack of accountability and lack of transparency, heavy-handed enforcement has on our daily lives. And I'll conclude, Congresswoman, by saying that the issues of use of force in our region have been addressed adequately, first by Mr. Morgan in his previous capacity as head of Internal Affairs at CBP, and hopefully now in his current tenure. But we still have unresolved issues of use of force in our community. And we are talking about U.S. citizens, we are talking about children, we are talking about Mexican nationals standing on the Mexican side of the border who have been killed by CBP agents and officers, and those cases remain unresolved. In order for us to protect the homeland, we must ensure that we protect the basic values that we hold dear to our nation, and those are the values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'll tell you, Congresswoman, we will be happy the day that I'm able to take my kid to see his grandparents, and I don't have to be pulled over to question a 2-year-old's nationality. That is a shameful practice in this country, and it must come to an end.
I want to thank the witnesses. I want to thank the chairwoman. She has been enormously kind, and this is a passion of mine, and I'm excited that I got to hear the real important people that were here on this panel. I just want to conclude by saying that, Madam Chairwoman, we had developed from 2012 to 2016 this outreach program, a border community liaison program. I didn't get a chance to ask ranch liaison and town hall meetings. Maybe we'll have another hearing where we bring additional representatives out of New Mexico, Texas, and to hear about how those meetings are working. And then I do think Mr. Ramirez, and I've heard no contrary testimony, is very much worth listening to, developing the racial profiling matrix to try and deal with those citizens traveling about. And I think he specifically, since he's from San Diego, talking about, as he said, going up north, but going up north in his state of California and having not crossed any border and then having to be subjected to that. So from Ms. Davis wanting results and making sure that checkpoints, there's action in checkpoints and that there's an effective checkpoint, I think what we've got here is a meeting of the mind that we've got to be reasonable. Ma'am, you were here, but I would encourage to look again at H.R. 1417 and however it could be updated, coalesced with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We drew bipartisan support. There were some bumps in the road about the 90% versus 100. I don't know if anyone can reach that number, but certainly in keeping with Mr. Ramirez's admonitions, we could look at this question again and find the reasonable common ground. I don't know whether, Madam Chair, I could encourage you with a smile to join me on comprehensive immigration reform, which is certainly still there, and I think if we had that legislation, we wouldn't have a number that keeps going up and down. We're not sure 11 million individuals who are seeking status here. But I think our work here is about border security, and I think these have been very instructive testimonies. And to each and every one of you, I am so grateful that you came this morning. Thank you. I'm going to get to work on the great suggestions that you've made. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I have a lot of other questions, but I first want to comment that we don't have the voice of the agents at the table today, and I think it is important. And I've heard you all say, but it's important to reiterate that we have men and women out there that are putting on the uniform every single day to serve their country in a different way, to keep our country and our community safe. Many of them are veterans, and it's a continuation of their service. We recently lost Manuel Alvarez in the Tucson sector because of the dangers of the type of job that they do. We recently had a shooting incident at our port of entry, although that wasn't Border Patrol, it was a CBP, but still, this is a dangerous job. And we have men and women in our community that are saying, "Here am I, send me. I wanna help keep our community and our country safe." As Chief Morgan mentioned, 7,542 assaults on agents happening. When I was in the military, when we would see challenges of any issues related to mission execution, we would always ask, as leaders, have we given them the guidance, resources, and training that they need in order to do the job and do it well? And so we, I think, should be asking ourselves from this committee to the Border Patrol leadership in Washington, D.C., guidance, resources, and training for them to be able to do the job. None of them get out of bed in the morning and say, let's not secure the border, right? These men and women are doing what they're told to do with the training and the resources that they have been given. And we are here to look at that bigger picture of what needs to change as far as the guidance, the resources, the training, the policies, equipping them. I mean, when I was out with them on a no-notice ride-along out there, didn't let anybody know we were going to be out there a few months ago, and they talked about how many of them are out by themselves, patrolling at night without any night vision goggles. And this doesn't make any sense. So I know, Mr. Ramirez, you talked about the increase of the resources that we're using towards border security, but we need to make sure, and this is part of our discussion today, those resources are used well. It's the right amount of resources, the right amount of manpower to execute the correct strategy, to make sure that we're being effective, implementing the right technologies. Again, we're taking care of the men and women to make sure that they're compensated, for their service and all the elements that go with that. We're not investing in strategies that don't work, which get to the discussion today of effectiveness. How do we know we're being effective with our resources unless we're measuring it well, and we can have a thoughtful discussion on how to adjust the strategy in order to get to the objectives that, again, we can all agree on. Keep the country safe, keep the community safe, protect civil liberties, don't impact the daily lives and the economic situation and the security situation for our communities. I mean, those are things we can all agree upon.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I apologize. May I just put into the record, moving the line of scrimmage, ask unanimous consent?
Without objection.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, again, I just want to remind ourselves that even with the conversation that we've had, I think our intent needs to be to find where we can better equip these men and women that are out there serving with the guidance, the resources, and the training that they need, with the context of the information that we're presenting today. And I know there's been many conversations at the local level, at the liaison meetings, at the sector level. We have a new chief of the Border Patrol. So this is our opportunity, again, to take a fresh look with new leadership to find that common ground where we're good stewards of taxpayers' resources, we're providing the resources to the men and women who are serving, who are doing a very dangerous job, right? And we're having the right strategy that they are going to go out and execute on a daily basis in order to keep us safe. So I feel it's important to provide that context as we're moving forward in our discussion here. I will also say that we've got two of my bills that passed unanimously in the House related to some of the things we're talking about. One of them is a Border Security Technology Accountability Act, which simply says, let's make sure if there's an investment in technology that it has procurement guidelines and oversight and accountability to make sure it's not wasting taxpayers' resources. We've seen a lot of wasted resources in the past, passed unanimously in the House, being held up in the Senate. And we have another one that's addressing a full new threat assessment of the southern border, the situation awareness, operational control, just a full, fresh threat assessment so that we can have, again, a common understanding of what we're dealing with as we are addressing, okay, now that we understand what we're dealing with, what is the best way to adjust our strategy to address the threat? And so I look forward to those bills passing through the Senate so we can move forward on these important issues. So I want to follow up with a second round with everybody of, again, we don't have Chief Morgan at the table with you. So last round I asked you to be Chief Morgan. Now, we have the opportunity to follow up with him with questions from us to him about the issues related to this current strategy. So what questions would you have to Chief Morgan that you would like us to ask him related to your testimony and related to addressing this defense in depth and interior checkpoints focus that we have today? Starting with Mr. Brasher.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think in terms of a question, maybe I would say it's a question and an invitation. I recognize, as we said earlier, I know he's got a tough job. He's got a whole border. I'm focused more on Arizona's border right now. But I think he's on the right track by getting out in the communities. And frankly, with all respect to he and his leadership team, I think it would be wonderful if he would come and sit down with people such as ourselves in these actual communities and just start a dialogue. The questions I might come up with right now may be similar or totally different to the questions that other people, in our communities would bring up. So I know that's easier said than done. I know that oftentimes when people in leadership travel, often it's just not easy. You travel with public relations people, et cetera.
A bit of a bubble sometimes.
Yeah, I applaud you going out with an agent one-on-one and just watching what they experience. But I think it's those kinds of experiences, though, that will bring a lot of what we're sharing in our testimonies, full circle. I would encourage him to abandon his uniform for a moment and drive through the checkpoints and just observe and just watch how the interaction takes place, what happens with the dogs, what happens when someone goes up over to secondary and oftentimes is subjected to what might be referred to as the indignity of standing by while your car is torn apart, or your question more in depth of coming down and sitting in a coffee shop with real business people who are sharing the stories and the antidote. So I know it's a long-winded answer perhaps to a simple question, but I think there will be more questions that would come from something like that, and I think they'd be very valuable for him as he forms his strategic plan moving forward.
Great, thanks. Ms. Davis?
Well, I have a million questions for him. He'll have to take a deep breath. And I actually invited him myself this morning to come down to the southern border in Arizona and see that it is very different than Texas. I think I'd ask him, one thing would be, how do you plan to make that whole border a cohesive thing? How do you make it the U.S. border, not the Tucson sector of the border? I'm just going to reiterate more cohesiveness there. I just think that's really important, and I've already forgotten my second idea.
That's okay. We have invited him, and we will continue. We know he's just getting his feet on the ground, but to Arizona. And look, our subcommittee has oversight of the entire border, right? So he needs to get out to Texas and New Mexico and California and talk to not just the dog and pony show that often comes with leadership visiting the field, but actually talking to residents, talking to businesses, talking to people, those that are seeing the impacts, and the agents to get the unfiltered.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, and concerns Mr. Ramirez, is it's not unique to Hispanics. That sometimes when you go through the Border Patrol check, you feel like you're being interrogated. I've had to open my trunk for no reason, and I think one of the things he has to do is make sure that those agents react and relate to the people coming through like they're really human people that assume that we have a right to be there.
Right.
I think it's an interaction between the public and the Border Patrol, and you don't want to think of them as the enemy, you want to think of them as your friend. So I think that's one comment I would have to
So some of that is, I think, relationship building in the community, and then making sure there's continuity of training for practices of what is a probable cause and how they can do the searches and things, is what I've heard. I agree. This is America, not the Gaza Strip. Right? And so to have law-abiding American citizens have to be subjected to this, often to just go about their daily business. This is ideally not where we want to be. Again, we've got to balance that with where we are right now, and start moving towards, I think, a strategy that addresses all the issues that have been here today in a way that's thoughtful and not reckless and creating more vulnerabilities. But I think we can all agree that the more we can, move the line of scrimmage and not have the impacts that have been talked about today, I think the better off we're going to be across the board. So thank you. Dr. Golub?
Yes, Chairwoman McSally. I would follow up on the question that you asked, Chief Morgan.
Yeah.
What have you done with the recommendations that were made in the University of Arizona study? Because I do not have a good answer on that. The research team at the university put in a tremendous amount of brain power and time and hours and thoughtfulness and dialogue with Border Patrol to make sure that we understood their issues. We did not want to impose our framework on them. We wanted to use their framework to inform our research, and we provided very specific recommendations, and I would greatly appreciate a sit-down with Chief Morgan to frankly discuss, did these recommendations work for you?
Right.
If not, why not? Is there another way we could approach their problem? Is there other restraints that you have as a Border Patrol chief that prevent you from implementing some of the recommendations? And if so, what other measures can we take? I firmly believe in action-oriented research and data-driven research, and would greatly appreciate the opportunity to help push these recommendations or other recommendations to be useful to Border Patrol and in protecting our nation.
I agree, Dr. Golub. This goes back to being a good steward of the limited resources that we have. If the taxpayer has invested in the brain power and the efforts of all of you at the University of Arizona, what are we doing with it to make sure that it's useful? And a partnership of follow-up of, what else we could be doing moving forward, I think is extremely important with all the expertise that your team has provided. And so when we do invite the chief there, we'll make sure that it includes a visit or a meeting to your team for sure. And I think about it, again, I'm always framed by my experiences in the military. If you're out there doing the job as a Border Patrol agent, you're spending 2 hours doing your job and you're spending 8 hours processing information. I mean, that is important, but you got to make it usable for the agent so they're not spending 8 hours inputting data in a non-user-friendly way, or they're fat-fingering it into 2 or 3 different systems based on how many reports they have to do. That goes back to the morale issue of there's nothing worse than inefficient use of our resources of agents that we're asking them to provide more data, but we're not giving them the systems and the process is that they provide data once and it's usable. Let the back end figure out how to make it usable so that we can assess it well, as opposed to putting it on the front end and making the agents have to do more and more cumbersome bureaucratic processes so that we have better data. So that has to be tuned in as we're moving forward, addressing improving the data for sure to make it usable. Mr. Ramirez?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I think my fellow panelists touch on something that's fundamental, which is to have ongoing conversations with folks who live there, who experience the situation on a daily basis, and who actually have solutions. We are not part of the problem here. We're part of the solution. And the problem has been when the bureaucracy fails to understand and pick up the recommendations that for several years we have been putting on the table before CVP and the Department of Homeland Security. But I will point on one important issue, Chairwoman, which is the issue of retention, of Border Patrol agents. As I said, I grew up on the southern border. A lot of my classmates from high school and college are Border Patrol agents. They understand what the border is about. They understand the binational character of our communities and that we go back and forth. But a lot of my good friends don't stay as Border Patrol agents because of the morale issues.
Yeah.
If we don't have folks being recruited from the communities that these agents were sworn to protect, it's very difficult to understand really the historic legacy that borderlands have had. And there's the issue of recruitment, particularly recruitment of women. We have to look into why are we not recruiting enough women for Border Patrol? I believe it's only 5% of the force are only women. if we look at how do we train our agents better, how do we recruit agents from communities, how do we recruit women, I think that then we will develop a much better relationship with folks. And I'll guarantee you that, if somebody staffing a checkpoint, a Border Patrol agent knows, hey, I know who you are. You're my neighbor, you're my friend. We go to the same church. Our kids, are in the same, baseball league. It will be a different relationship. And I think it's about toning down the way that Border Patrol carries itself in our communities and ensuring that we have a much better relationship. That has to begin at the top. Because the folks on the ground want to do that, and unfortunately, the good folks who want to work for Border Patrol aren't being retained by the agency.
Great, thank you. All right, well, this is a robust discussion. I really appreciate the time and the effort of all the panelists to come out today to testify before the subcommittee. We will continue to be addressing and highlighting the issues and the challenges related to defense in depth as Chief Morgan gets his feet on the ground, to follow up with him and to work together to find ways that we can make sure that we're securing our border well, to keep our country and community safe while taking into account all the impacts that have been shared today by those that are representing parts of the communities that are being impacted by this current strategy. So I really appreciate all of your perspectives and the time and effort you took to testify today. Let's see, a little bureaucracy here. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, so we'd ask that you please respond in writing when we send those to you. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. And without objection, the committee now stands adjourned.
Oh, nice to meet you, too.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to meet together with our new chief when he comes down.
That would be nice.
That would be delightful.
Sure, maybe we should exchange information so that we can make sure that